All right, now, everybody. Quiet, listen to me. We're going to start a show. Now, some of you people have been with me before. You know it's going to be a tough grind, but we're going to have a show.
Hello. Good Monday morning to all of you. Mark Thompson not here today. I'm Michael Shure. I'm here with Kim and Tony. We're going to be doing the show for the next 2 hours. A lot of news and a lot of things to question and wonder about and be scared about, and I don't know about be excited about. But we will be covering the sort of gamut. We have some adventures with Pete Hegseth. We have Easter and Donald Trump. We have, of course, everything on immigration and what is happening in El Salvador, what is happening here with Venezuelans, what's happening with the courts. We've got a lot of stuff to cover. We have 48 seconds of sports at some point during the show, but we do open with our friend Pope Francis, who passed overnight. At least in my overnight. I'm not exactly sure when the Pope expired, but yesterday Vice President Vance met with him in Rome. Was it yesterday or the day before? And then the next day the Pope passed away. He's been ill for quite a while, in and out of the hospital. There's a picture of the Vice President and the Pope giving him the kind of look that a lot of us would give the Vice President. It is,
looks like this, almost like the side eye.
Yeah, it is. It is a little bit of side. It's like, oh, really? You're the Vice President? But
Vance was Catholic. He had just in, I think, a few years ago had converted to Catholicism, I think.
Yeah. And the Vice President today saying, that he reaches out to all the Christians who are mourning. And it's not just Christians. I think that this Pope, with at least within the context, whether you're Catholic or not, within the context of the Catholic Church, was a very progressive Pope. That he angered a lot of Catholics because of that, because of his outreach on issues like immigration, on his trying to mend and create relations with Muslims around the world. He was a different kind of Pope, as he'd said he would be. He's the first Latin American. He's an Argentine. He came to the papacy at a time when Pope Benedict had resigned, which was a very unusual rite of passage within the Catholic Church and its leadership. And he took over from a decidedly different Pope in Benedict. Benedict was a really strict Catholic. He adhered to papal doctrine in a way that a lot of popes in the modern era might not have. A lot of cardinals who would ascend to the papacy. There you see Cardinal Ratzinger, who then became Pope Benedict. And so when Francis took over, it was a breath of fresh air to a lot of people looking from the outside. Not only that, the Catholic Church is having waning interest in parts of the world where it had most seen its success in places in the Western world. And now to have had a Pope of Latin American descent who really was a different kind of, almost a no-frills Pope, coming off of Benedict, who wore everything you're supposed to wear, all the vestments of the papacy, and adhered to very, very conservative writings within papal thought processes. And so now the question is, where do they go from here? There will be a conclave with all the cardinals coming in from around the world. There are favorites, as there tend to be, and then there are question marks. There's where do they want to go? Kim, do they want to go to another part of the world? There is a Philippine cardinal whose name for the moment escapes me, but I will find it. I think it's Tagle, Tagle, I believe. Tagle, I don't know how it's pronounced. He is somebody who would be more in line with Pope Francis. He would be a continuation, it's seen that way. There's a cardinal in Marseille named Aveline, who is looked at a French person who is a French resident, the Cardinal of Marseille, who is looked at as somebody in the same vein as well? Or will they go with somebody who is a little bit more strict, a little bit more old order. And there are people that ride the fence there. And then there are Italian popes. And of course, popes had always been Italian, or for a very long time were. And the question is, will they then go to an Italian pope? But this is, whatever you think of religion, whatever you think of the Catholic Church, it is in fact a focal point for many people in the world. The Catholics make up a huge part of the population in many parts of the world, but the Vatican is still looked at in a way for diplomacy, for getting a rubber stamp on legislation in countries around the world, and how we treat each other. Again, a lot of what they preach is backwards to a lot of people, but this Pope tried to move the church forward in many ways. And for that, I think he will be best remembered by people who are not Catholic, by people who look at the Catholic Church as kind of a little backwards in some ways. So he's going to be mourned by many.
We've not had a pope of a different race, right? There's been no Asian pope. There's been no black pope.
Correct. The popes really were Italian, and only Italian, as far as I know, for a very long time. And the thought that, I remember when Pope John Paul II was a Polish, Karol Wojtyła was his name, I believe. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly as well. But Karol Wojtyła was in Krakow. He was the cardinal there. And it was massive news when they picked a Polish man to be the Pope. When the cardinals got together and did that, of course, they would say St. Peter picked him. And it was, that sort of intervention that goes into the votes. If you saw the movie Conclave, by the way, a fun movie, a good movie. And I know I'm not the movie guy, but it is really, it sort of tells you a little bit about, or shows you a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes at these conclaves. So all the cardinals come in from all over the world. They spend as much time as they need to in order to have a pope. There are many votes, and I should say there's a little breaking news on the Pope, but it's that he died of a what they're saying was a cerebral hemorrhage, I guess.
Oh wow!
Let me
Which
get
is
that
interesting
right.
because
it was a cerebral stroke.
Okay.
And that was the cause of that was his cause of death. At 7, this is had not been shared. At 7:35 this morning, the Bishop of Rome, Francis, returned to the home of his father. That was what Kevin Farrell said at the announcement of the time. And then it was the Vatican's top doctor now saying that Francis died of a cerebral stroke that put him into a coma and led to irreversible heart failure. The death was confirmed Monday by Dr. Andrea Arcangeli, the head of the Vatican's health department. In a statement, he noted that Francis also suffered from episodes of respiratory insufficiency and had bilateral pneumonia, as well as type 2 diabetes and hypertension. Francis died Monday at 7:30 a.m. Vatican time. So a cerebral stroke that led to failure. The Pope, the Vatican will organize this next conclave, and a pope will be named after, days of, and here you see, this is the path to the papacy. The Catholic Church mourns the passing of Francis. Attention turns to the Vatican, where preparations are underway for the conclave to elect the successor. Of course, we all know the white smoke signals a new pope, and then somebody comes in and onto the balcony and says, Habemus Papam, which in Latin means we have a pope. And we will see who that pope is. As a sideline, I know they talk about gambling here on the show once in a while, and I'm part of those. I was in a papal pool last time where they grouped a bunch of cardinals, and you just sort of bought a group of cardinals. And if your pope wins, I mean, it's luck of the draw. If your pope wins, then you win the pool. You can gamble on anything, including the conclave, which is a great thing.
We had a couple comments that I thought might be pertinent. Vanessa says, Pope Francis appointed most of the bishops who will be voting on his replacement, so there's a good chance that the next pope will be like him. Also, and I think
Yeah,
that
I don't know. I mean, I don't doubt that, but I think it's just cardinals that, I mean, maybe he did that
Mhm,
too. I don't know enough about it, but
I don't
only the
either.
cardinals
Yeah.
get to vote. But that's true. It's sort of, so
Mhm.
we're seeing it here, right? When you appoint enough of the judges, they rule in your favor. So
Exactly. Vicky, I don't think Vicky's alone in saying that she liked the Pope, even though she's not Catholic. I think a lot of people like this Pope and his message.
yeah, I do. And I saw something from Tammy as well, where it said, "It's sad I'm not Catholic, but I thought highly of him and his messages to the world." I do.
Right.
I think that was what was, the people that would look at the papacy and the Catholic
Mhm.
Church and all of that as sort of otherworldly for a long time, with rules and regulations that seemed certainly past their prime, if ever they were to have had a prime. I think people who look at that saw this Pope as kind of holding the hand of the church and moving it into the next generation, and looking at people. Look, he chose the name Francis because of Saint Francis of Assisi, who took care of all creatures great and small, and that seemed to be what his motivation was as Pope, and certainly when he took that name. So I think that it's unusual. Yeah, and Katie Lynch says, I was surprised that Francis was the first
Mhm.
Jesuit Pope. Yeah, I think so too. I think within the Catholic Church, maybe Jesuits are looked at as sort of otherworldly, the way that people outside of the church look at Catholics or any religion in general, if you're not immersed in it. So I think that's true. It is a little surprising, but that's definitely what motivated a lot of his practice, and that's how he was the person who was chosen. But in Argentina, that's who he was among
Mhm.
the people of Buenos Aires. That's what he was known as there, as this kind of different flavor of Pope. He didn't want all of the the pomp and circumstances of the papacy. He wanted just to do well and kind of bring the church into the modern era. To that, I mean, he may have done that. It really, I think, will depend on who his successor is, and whether or not, if I forget who it was who wrote in and said it, if in fact the people that are voting on him are going to vote in a way to continue this, then they have a few options apparently within the yeah. Maybe Tony, can you bring up the um, the list of the gambling on the popes thing there, who the favorites are?
There's a lot of talk in the chat about conspiracies about whether Vance played a role in this, but I think the Pope was really not well.
Yeah, he was not
Yeah,
well. I mean, it was
yeah.
clear he was not well. He'd been in the hospital. I can't. So it looks like Panolin is and he's sort of a centrist. He's a little bit old Pope, a little bit new Pope. He's one
Okay.
of the sort of top diplomats within the Vatican. And Tagle is the Filipino man who I mentioned earlier, who would be a lot more like Pope Francis. And then I don't, those other two, I have to confess to not being. Who's the last one there? I can't even read that last one. Is that Mark?
I can't see it either.
Okay. If he's the
Maybe he
one
can
from
blow it up.
Marseille, I know that the one from Marseille is also a top pick. But again, we don't know anything. We're just looking at what the odds are here on odds
The
checker.
odds checker.
Yeah, and I'm
It's
not even
funny.
sure that that's the guy from. I don't even know if that's the guy from Marseille, just because his name is Mark, spelled like a Frenchman.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, I think that it's something to watch, and it's a spectacle, and
yeah,
it is a horse race. Yes,
yeah.
in fact, John, it's a horse race. It always is when these papal conclaves happen, but they're interesting, and they capture the world. And every reporter I know, who I had a few friends who were reporters who were in the Vatican while the Pope was sick, and they were there for weeks
Mm,
because there was a time a month or so ago, maybe it was
mm.
a bit longer ago, where it seemed like the Pope was not going to survive when he had that bilateral pneumonia, which means you have it
Yeah.
in both lungs. And so here's Vilma saying that I love this Pope, and I'm very sad, and I'm a Catholic. Pope Francis was a very decent man and a compassionate Christian, which is what I think a lot of people saw in this Pope that perhaps they didn't see in Pope Benedict and maybe even Pope John Paul II. But I don't know enough. I do remember when John Paul II became Pope, they had elected John Paul the First, who took over the papacy from John the Sixth, and he took over Paul the Sixth. Sorry, he took over and he served for a month, and there were all these beliefs that he was poisoned, and nobody knew what happened. And the Pope, then they had to all the cardinals had to return a month later to the Vatican, and they had to elect another Pope, and then just thereafter, it was during when that Pope was named, when Pope John Paul II was named, the New York Times was on strike, and there was somebody issuing like every other day. They were putting out something called Not the New York Times in New York with the same font, and it was sort of a precursor to The Onion, to be honest. And the headline was, after Pope John Paul II was named, the headline read, "Pope dies yet again, Cardinals return from airport." And I thought, I was very young, but I thought that was hysterical when I read that. The strike was settled and a Pope came. So yeah, there will be a Pope, and it's fascinating. Like it's a good story to pay attention to if you want to distract yourself from all the stories that we are paying attention to now, just because of how it's done and the solemnity and the attention it's going to get. I mean, this is the first, well, maybe not that's not true, but the second Pope named in the era of social media. So it will be interesting to watch. So I urge that. It's a little distraction. And yeah, that movie Conclave was very good. I liked it. Oh, yeah, look at that. Pope dies yet again. Yep, Cardinals return.
There it is.
Remember it correctly. Yeah. Reign is briefest ever. It was just not the New York Times was great because it made everybody laugh for the months of that strike.
So the Pope Francis was 88. And I think it's just worth mentioning his last words from the at the Vatican to people.
I think his last words were, "That's the Vice President of the United States."
He gave an address on Easter Sunday. How he managed the strength to do this, I don't know. It was a very brief appearance, but he said, "I would like us to renew our hope that peace is possible." He said, "I appeal to warring parties, call a ceasefire, release hostages, come to the aid of starving people that aspires to a future of peace," is what he said.
Yeah.
So fitting at last message from him.
Yeah, it is a fitting last message, and that is what popes that's the message they're meant to preach. And when they get sort of bogged down in the politics of the Vatican, it is first of all, they can't exist the way they existed, right? I mean, the church has to change with the times, and he seemed to have been that pivot Pope to have it change with the times. And the question is now, of course, will they continue that or will they backtrack? Because there are still older and more conservative people, men who will be, one of whom might be chosen for Pope. So we just don't know. But I just think every once in a while, this happens so infrequently that it's kind of cool to peer in on something that has been done for centuries. As as ridiculous as some of it is, it's still fascinating. It's like the coronation of King Charles. I mean, on its surface and sitting and watching it, it's absurd, but it's also fun, right? I mean, it's fun to watch it. It's fun to see people who are really into it, and that tradition, as silly as we may find it, is kind of captivating. And I think with these papal conclaves, the same thing happens.
So what they're doing today is one of the traditions. They have the Pope's chief of staff call out his baptismal name 3 times. And if there's no response, then a death certificate is prepared. So
Right.
that's what they're doing today.
And no one responded.
I don't think anybody responded. I don't know if they've done it yet. Then the chief of staff takes the ring of the fisherman from Francis and destroys it, along with a papal seal, to ensure there are no forgeries. And then they start planning for the body to lie in state. That makes the funeral. They make the funeral arrangements, and then they prep for the election of a successor, which is done 15 to 20 days after the Pope's death. So that's the process there.
Yeah. Vance probably thinks he's Pope now because he was there. He's the vice president. Aren't I Pope now? Yeah. Somebody wrote in and said that it's the selection of the Pope is more important than the coronation of a king. It probably is, and certainly affects more people. I'm just talking about the spectacle of it. I'm not talking
Yeah.
about anything of how important it is when you see these
Sure.
sorts of things done. I mean, the NFL draft is a cool spectacle. We never saw it till they started airing it on television. It's a cool spectacle. They overhype it, yeah. But so in the same way as a coronation, the selection of a pope steeped in history and tradition, and I think it's fascinating. But it has having nothing to do with how important or unimportant a king or a pope might be. And so, but yeah, so keep your eyes peeled. Join, start yourself a papal pool if you'd like. I enjoyed it last. I lost $20, but well worth the look in. And so I admonish you to pay attention because it's fun. Now we get to leave the Vatican and come back to the shores of this wonderful nation and talk about what's been happening. Kim, it's been sort of a busy Easter holiday, right? I mean,
it has been. And then we wake up this morning and the stocks are tanking again because of all the back and forth between Trump and Jerome Powell. And so I guess that has kickstarted another loss on Wall Street. And I just got an alert. Dow dropped 700. Stocks extend losses as Trump slams Powell. Dow drops 700 points is my headline. So, wow.
Yeah, it's these are massive drops, and what I know of the markets, and I'm not an economist at all, but what I know of the markets is when there is uncertainty, the markets hate it. And somebody was on TV in the background earlier today talking about how even the Pope dying creates some sort of uncertainty. Well,
Sure.
It does, but I don't believe that that's impacting the markets. It's clear. It's what was going on with Powell. It's what's going on with tariffs. And I would say that it also has something to do with division, small pieces of division, which we will get into a little bit later, within the Republican Party now, aimed at Trump, at not listening to the judges, at his Secretary of Defense, and turmoil that we'll talk about as well, turmoil at that department. We're also going to be joined later today by David Weigel, who many of you may know from his social media, but was lead political reporter for the Washington Post, is now at Semafor, and I think just a spectacularly good journalist. So he can enlighten us a little bit as to what is going on in politics. But these drops, there is this. We have never been less certain, or certainly not in a very long time, about what is going on in politics now. And I've just listed a few things. Each of you watching, each of you, you, Kim, Tony, could probably name 4 other things that make this such an uncertain time. And that's what the markets react to. But with Powell and the Fed and everything that's going on there, I think it's that probably is the main factor of what's going on right now with these markets tanking.
Yeah, the market's tanking, and then over the weekend, we found out that Hegseth has been a prolific texter. That one text with the journalist from The Atlantic wasn't the only one, and the other text that he apparently was talking about the bombing in Yemen included his wife, his lawyer, and his brother. So,
right.
I mean,
I believe there was one with his mother as well, if I'm not mistaken. Am I wrong? But
no,
I'm not sure. So, yeah.
I don't, it's to the point where that creates uncertainty as well, I think. When you look at what's going on with the Trump administration, whether America's secrets are safe, our position in the world, all of it.
Yeah, it compounds the narrative, right? I mean, it has, so everywhere you look, there is a teeny bit of chaos. There's something between a teeny bit of chaos and absolute chaos. And markets tend not to like that. And a lot of people say, well, I'm not invested in the markets. I don't care about the markets. Those are for rich people. And it's not always the case, because many people's pensions, government pensions, teachers' pensions, are tied up in the market. People's IRAs rely on the market. So it is, yes, on its surface, wealthy people are much more involved personally in the market than others. That said, there are very, very many people whose retirements are tied, or a bulk of their retirement is tied to how the market is doing. And again, it is Trump not, thinking about people. And I can say that pretty pointedly because we've seen it in action for a long time. We even saw it in a way with COVID when the whole country and the whole world was being affected. So I think the way that these markets, we look at them sometimes cynically, but they do impact a lot of people all the time.
We have video, Tony, from an economist. His name is Joseph Stiglitz, and actually, Mark sent this over to us. And we're talking about tariffs and the economy, and so I thought maybe we could listen in. Go ahead, Tony. Let's listen to Mr. Stiglitz on how he feels tariffs play a role here.
What is also clear is that Trump has no economic theory behind what he's doing, and I think that's most disturbing, both to me as an economist and to those who are on the other side of negotiations. I've talked to some of these people and they say, we don't know how to negotiate because the other side is not a normal negotiator. Normally the other side knows what they want. There's a theory about how trade works. That's not true here. It's a different world. So let me give you an example. Trump thinks that trade deficits by themselves, and in particular trade deficits in goods, reflect somebody treating us unfairly. And it's based sort of on a premise that we are better than any other country, so people should be buying more goods from us than we are buying from them. But we are in the 21st century, not where we were in 1950. Services are the major part of our economy. Goods production, manufacturing is 9-10%. What are important? Service sector, tourism, education, health. What is he doing to those sectors? Look what he's done in the last few weeks. He's devastated our education system. The way his immigration people have treated those wanting to come into our country with valid passports, visas, has discouraged tourism. So he is hell-bent at hurting America's major export industry, tourism, and education. I've talked to firms that have thought about bringing manufacturing back to the United States. They say we don't have the logistics, we don't have the supply chains that you need to bring complex manufacturing back. And modern manufacturing is robotic. So even if we brought manufacturing back, there are not going to be many jobs. So the reality is that his picture of bringing us back to the 1950s, that's never going to happen. But what's going to happen in the meanwhile? We're not going to be able to get those goods that Americans want.
Yeah, thank you, Tony.
Yeah.
So that's Joseph Stiglitz, an esteemed economist. And I think when you look at these experts from around the world, and they're all scratching their heads going, everything Trump is doing makes 0% sense.
No, it's true. I interviewed Joe Stiglitz once, and I remember after my interview, it was on I don't even remember what the story was. I interviewed him in DC. And I'm trying to think. Well, first of all, he's a Nobel laureate, which is pretty cool. And he was. One thing I will say is that after the interview, I turned to the cameraman and I said, "That guy was so impressive, but I had no idea what he was talking about." He was just those people, but he makes it accessible to most people. But when you're not an economist at all, and you can't balance a checkbook, he's one of those people. It's like, wow. You're just in awe of. He was on Time's list of the 100 most influential people in the world. And the reason I mention that is because I remember that from the time when I interviewed him. But you'll recall we had Josh Koskoff on the show when I hosted for Mark some time ago. He was a gun lawyer, the lawyer who represented the Sandy Hook people and the Uvalde people and put Remington out of business, and he, the little Mark Thompson show pedigree, he was named this year to that list, the 100 most influential people in America. So, yeah, so that was a coup for the Mark Thompson show. Now we've
There
had
you
Joe
go.
Stiglitz on, sort of, and he was on
Yeah.
the list, and we've had Josh Koskoff in the flesh-ish on the show.
Wow.
So that was my aside. But yeah, let's go back to the meat of what Joe Stiglitz was saying, which is that these, the smartest people in the room, that Trump will say only the best, but the smartest people in the room are usually not in the room with Trump. And these are the people that are talking about the dangers. Whatever you think of Jerome Powell, he's a smart economist with a good handle on the Fed, and the dismissing him as unfit for being there is absurd. But a lot of these economists know what is going on with these tariffs and how they're misguided. David Weigel, who we're coming on with next, actually talked to some Democrats who are pro-tariff. I think Chris Deluzio, the representative. So it'll be interesting to hear what Deluzio had to say about these tariffs, because they're driving things in a direction that are not just about punishing other countries. Like he said, they're punishing America. The tourism is a disaster right now in so many of the places that rely on it. Florida, especially, talking about Canadians not coming to Florida. Canadians are making plans to go elsewhere now. The Bahamas.
Yeah, there's a campaign. I guess there was a big Canadian tourism thing in Palm Springs. They saw a lot of Canadians every year, and people are canceling their reservations. And now Palm Springs is putting up these signs everywhere saying, "We love Canada. We love Canadians. Don't not come because of this." So tourism is a big thing. But also,
it's a big thing because of all the people that it affects, right? And we're talking about the market before, and its wide-ranging effect on teacher pensions, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing. If you own a deli in Palm Springs and you sell X number of sandwiches extra when tourists are in town and having picnics or picking up sandwiches or doing whatever, then you're affected too by this. And it doesn't, and not to mention that the cost of everything you're buying is more expensive. So, I mean, it's a great thing that Palm Springs has this going. Palm Springs loves Canada, but, Canada's loving Jamaica and the Bahamas. Canada is loving Mexico right now. Canada is loving Europe.
They're voting with their wallet. They don't want to give money to the United States of America. And I can understand why. We're apparently now on their enemies list, which sucks.
Yeah. As somebody wrote in, they don't choose Florida first. Las Vegas, Washington State, California, bordering states. That's true. Canadians do, though, make up a big, there is a huge migration from Quebec every year into Florida, snowbirds, elderly, retirees, etc. And they take condos and Airbnbs and hotels, and they are canceling them in droves or not booking them at all. So it is having a practical effect on places. And it's not just Florida. I just happened to have read a pretty in-depth article about that. And the effects of these tariffs are far-reaching.
What do you think about, and I don't know if you think this has an effect on the economy. I look at it as extra layoffs. I mean, obviously an effect on the knowledge base in America, but all of the money being pulled from colleges. I was just reading another story, Michael, about the Trump administration planning to yank an additional $1 billion in funding from Harvard because Harvard won't go along and get along with policies the Trump administration wants to inflict on them, including who they can hire, right? What the types of things they can teach. They want to stick their fingers in what Harvard does. And so Harvard, with enough money to say, we're not doing that, can do that. Other institutions might not have that kind of slush fund to be able to rely on. And so I just look at that as bad for the economy too, and in America in general.
No, there's no question, Kim. Not to mention, I'm glad you said it. The biggest story out of Harvard is the institutions that can't afford to take the position that Harvard did, who don't have the private endowments and the alumni base of great wealth that Harvard has. I mean, $2 billion to so many institutions is years and years and years of fundraising, and Harvard can make up for that. Gordon says, "Thank you, Harvard, for saying no to our idiot in the White House." Yeah, so there is that they have the ability to do that, but like you were saying, it is about what it does to the rest of the economy and what it does, what he's this war on universities, this getting the NIH involved, getting the CDC involved, talking about grants. All of it is affecting jobs. It's affecting, people, and it has a long life hereafter. Harvard, I think, will try and help once this episode is over, and certainly this administration try and help many of those institutions that were not able to help themselves during this time. Is what I would guess, if this is undone at any time. And a great conversation is what can and can't be undone in the Trump administration, the Trump legacy. There are certain things that can't be undone, like fake news, right? The labeling and the creating, sowing seeds of doubt in the media at every turn. That is, to me, a really devastating legacy that this administration will have, that the last Trump administration has already had. But these sort of edicts and presidential orders and those sorts of things, those can be easily, if not quickly, undone and reversed. President Biden did that with several of them. And if it can endure, and you look at these sorts of things, a lot of that can be changed later on. But there are some sort of intangibles that can't be changed.
We got a message from Luis, who throws in $5 to the Mark Thompson Show and says,
Thank
at
you,
what
Luis.
point does this become the Trump recession, also known as the Trump session? Latest, greatest hits from a dude that bankrupted a casino. How do you even do that? Hashtag special moron, writes Luis.
Yeah, how do you bankrupt a casino? Certainly, I've never bankrupted a casino, but it seems like one of those sort of fail-safe businesses. I don't know a ton about them, but they're taking money in hand over fist all day long, 24 hours a day, and Trump has to be one of the few people who've ever done that. I don't know the history of bankrupt casinos. I think there were some problems in Macau at a certain point, but a lot of that was because of graft and corruption. But I don't know anyone. Atlantic City is a place that suffered terribly, but its casinos did all right. The town and the story of Atlantic City is pretty ugly, and it's still there, and there are still casinos there, but they don't have the allure of Vegas. And I think competition was always a big issue with casinos, because there was only Vegas and Atlantic City for a long time. And they're businesses that were doing quite well. And then, the Foxwoods Casino in Connecticut opened up, and a lot of when Indian reservations were granted the ability to have the sovereignty over the casinos and whatnot, sovereignty over their own lands, and they opened casinos, that changed things. But to bankrupt a casino seems a very, very difficult thing to do.
Well, over the weekend, I guess Trump went on his Truth Social and he called Jerome Powell a, quote, major loser. So that touched off a bunch of uncertainty. The markets are down. It was down over, I think, 1,000 points on the NASDAQ. Tariffs also, they say, rattled markets as the S&P 500 and NASDAQ have been down over 2% as well. So it's affecting all these different markets. And
let me just interrupt for a second here. The message that you're talking about when he called Powell a loser and he lay into the ACLU and left-wing Democrats, this came on Easter weekend. This is the Easter message from President Trump. And I'm sure that if you scour the history of Easter messages from presidents of the United States, none of them have ever looked like what Trump said.
They do the same thing on Christmas. It's like, you expect a positive message of peace and hope all Americans are having a wonderful holiday, what have you, a message of hope. And instead what we get is negative Nelly again.
Yeah. I mean, constantly. I don't think you even expect that anymore. You would expect it from the president in the abstract. You would not expect it from this president. It's doing things in a way that gets him attention. Now, in fairness, Barack Obama probably sent out a text, and George Bush the same, or tweet or whatever. saying, well, there wasn't Twitter, I don't think, when George W. Bush was president, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Saying, wishing a beautiful and celebratory Easter for those who observe, and may you have the glad tidings of the season, or something like that, right? And nobody paid great attention to it, right? I mean, it would have gone away, but here we are doing what Donald Trump wants us to do, which is to talk about the ugly message that he sent the night before, and it's a trap, right? And we fell into the trap. Here is what he wrote: "Happy Easter to all." And now he is so big-hearted as to include the radical left lunatics, including the radical left lunatics. I even wish the radical left lunatics a happy Easter, who are fighting and scheming so hard to bring murderers, drug lords, dangerous prisoners, the mentally insane. Glad he thinks highly enough of all those people to capitalize them, and well-known MS-13 gang members and wife beaters back into our country. Happy Easter also to the weak and ineffective judges and law enforcement officials who are allowing this sinister attack on our nation to continue. Some of those judges were appointed, given jobs by Donald Trump, and attacked so violent that it will never be forgotten. Sleepy Joe Biden, can't get by one of these without digging him, purposefully allowed millions of criminals to enter our country. He deported more than per capita with any president, totally unvetted and unchecked, through an open borders policy that will go down in history as the single most calamitous act ever perpetrated upon America. He was by far the worst and most incompetent president, at least again, capitalized. A man who had absolutely no idea what he was doing. But to him and to the person that ran and manipulated the auto pen, perhaps our real president. So he's saying that's a reference to the fact that he thinks that pardons were not legitimate because they were done with auto pen. Anyway, it's the same thing. And then he finishes with with great love, sincerity, and affection, a very happy Easter.
Yeah, it sounds like you're having a great Easter over there at Mar-a-Lago or wherever.
Yeah. So I'm sorry for having read that, but I'm doing this because it's the thing we're here to talk about and to let people know is going on and how ugly it is. I think that what you're looking at is is his path to success. So in some ways you have to give him credit, because what it has done is this vitriol and this ugliness has motivated people who love to hate, who love an enemy, who love the us versus them argument that's being made all the time by Trump, and to great success. He's won twice, 2 out of 3 elections, and he has created a movement of people of like mind. Whether or not they pay attention once he's president, I don't know. But this is not this is his prescription for how to keep those people on board, how to have that following endure.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. I was reading a story about the state of California, Governor Newsom and Attorney General Rob Bonta. They're suing the Trump administration over the tariffs and over the economy, saying it's the largest single tax hike in our lifetime. And so I don't know if they will be able to affect change, or at least change for Californians with their lawsuits, or not.
Well, this is one of the things that the kind of abstract of it is something I want to talk with David Weigel about later. But it's I don't know if they're going to succeed either. And people say, well, why are they doing it? Why they sound, their voices are lost. What they can't do anything. Why are they doing? Why is Cory Booker giving a filibuster of 25 or 26 hours when nobody's paying attention? You have to do something, right? If he wasn't doing anything, you'd be criticizing Senator Booker for not speaking up, right? Whether or not it can be practically employed as a remedy to any of this, we don't know. But certainly we do know that doing nothing and saying nothing is not going to affect any change. And so I think it is important that these things happen, whether they succeed or fail, or whether they don't move the needle at all. I can tell you that not doing anything moves the needle in another way. We thank Harry Magnan, $5 donation.
Yay!
Is it me or does Trump sound unhinged? Surely, spelled properly. It can't be. Harry, thanks for participating in the show and helping out. It's really, really appreciated, even by me, who is only here once in a while. He does sound unhinged, but he, if you ask me, never doesn't or rarely doesn't. And when he doesn't sound unhinged, we remark we remark, oh, he gave a speech today. He really sounded, we say he sounded subdued.
Normal. He sounded normal.
He sounded normal. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that it is, it's what we've come to expect from this man. And sadly, he's not even, like a fifth of the way through his presidency or something. And so I do think that there are, and Phineas J. Whoopi saying California needs to withhold our federal taxes since we give welfare to red states. It's certainly something, Phineas, that people talk about all the time, right? I mean, the disproportionate contribution that California makes, and to have the president, when there were fires here, or say that he's not going to support natural disasters and federal dollars need to be vetted differently. Yet when it happens in a bright red state like Florida or Louisiana, oh my God, we got to get this money there. So there's no question. It's not going to, those sorts of things, that disproportionate giving isn't something California complains about. Because they know that we are the biggest state in California and one of the sixth largest economy in the world, et cetera, et cetera. That's sort of one of the burdens you have to live with by being a Californian. But when they hold it over you and they are hypocritical and duplicitous, then you do react in that way, and threatening to withhold federal dollars, and having Bonta and Newsom, Newsom probably doesn't want me to say those names in that order. Newsom and Bonta doing that and saying these things and taking legal action. It's why it's important.
You want to do a little bit of news? What do you think?
Yeah, let's do some news. Who do we have that can do news?
I don't know.
Yeah,
Some girl.
Yeah, let's look into it. She can't be Pope, but she can read the news.
That's right.
All right. Kim, let's do it.
On the Mark Thompson Show, I'm Kim McAllister. On the Mark Thompson Show, I should say, featuring today Michael Shure. I'm Kim McAllister, and this report is sponsored by CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. All right, thus we begin. As Michael was saying, Pope Francis has passed away at the age of 88. He died earlier today, about a month after leaving a hospital in Rome where he was treated for various respiratory ailments. Pope Francis's birth name was Jorge Bergoglio. He was born in Argentina. He was the first Jesuit pope, the first from the Americas, the first from the Southern Hemisphere, and the first pope from outside of Europe since the 8th century. As mentioned as well by Michael Shure, stocks are way lower on Wall Street as President Trump ramps up his attacks on Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell more than 1,200 points after Trump used a Truth Social post to push for an immediate rate cut and called Powell a major loser. Tariff concerns also continue to rattle the markets. S&P 500 and NASDAQ both have been down over 3% at times today as well. The Secretary of Defense is responding to reports over the weekend that he shared more military strike plans in yet another group chat on Signal. Speaking outside the White House, Pete Hegseth says some leakers got dismissed from the Pentagon and then some hit pieces came out. Hegseth didn't directly refute the reports, though, saying that he shared the military plans regarding an operation against the Houthis in Yemen with his brother, his lawyer, and his wife. Is it, Michael Shure, a case of disgruntled employees being ousted and dismissed? I don't know.
It doesn't matter if it's true and he's not denying it and it's found. Whether or not they were gruntled or disgruntled doesn't matter. These are the facts, and this is why there is tumult at the Defense Department.
Yeah, these people that were let go, those were his inner circle, right?
Yeah, they were. I mean, and certainly they were a part of his message team, which is ironic as well, because of the way he messages.
A group of House Democrats is now in El Salvador to campaign for a mistakenly deported immigrant to be returned to the United States. Kilmar Abrego Garcia was originally deported from Maryland due to what the White House said was an administrative error. The administration has since claimed he was a member of the MS-13 gang. The group of lawmakers includes California's Robert Garcia, Florida's Maxwell Frost, Oregon's Maxine Dexter, and Arizona's Yasemin Ansari. So, this on the heels of Senator Van Hollen, who went there and actually met with Abrego Garcia.
I should say, Mark says I've forgotten more about politics or whatever he says about me, but I can only name 2 of those 4. I didn't know the 2 women by their picture right there. So got some work. I have some work to do.
We'll see if they're able to meet with him. I was talking to someone today who said, this man, Abrego Garcia, he's a wife beater. He's got MS-13 tattoos on his fingers. And so, this is clear that he's a bad guy. And my argument is he might be a bad guy. I don't know. I'm sitting here in an office in California. How do I know? The fact is, we'll never know because he wasn't given due process. How long would it have taken for the process to play out? What, a couple more weeks for a judge to say, yep, looks like the evidence indicates you're a gang member, you got to go.
Yeah,
that would have been that easy to give the guy, the legal proceedings and what we do here in America rather than whisk him away in the middle of the night.
Yeah, I totally agree. This is not about whether or not he's a good guy. I don't know. B, this is about due process. This is about the American judicial system and the way things work in this country differently than in other countries. I don't think we look back at what happened with internment camps after the Second World War in Japan with Japanese Americans and say, oh, that was a good thing. There's never been a time where this Alien Act has been put in place, and it hasn't been since the 50s, that it's been looked at as having been successful. I'm just really focused on the fact that this person deserved due process. And at that point, then you make that determination. This is extrajudicial, and this is totally un-American by someone who says America first all the time, who himself has a questionable history with the law.
And we'll talk more about immigration coming up, but I'm struck by how the right-wing media is pushing their thumb on the lever of he's a bad guy, he's a bad guy, he's a bad guy, instead of focusing on due process and the rule of law in America.
But it's not just he's a bad guy, it's look at him, he's a bad guy, which makes it worse because that is the motivation for everything.
Sorry, I had to sneeze during the news. Thank you for that. There is this is very big news. Hold on, I sneeze one more time. My apologies.
Bless you. So I will continue talking about.
All right.
Garcia.
Always
they
always come in threes. Ooh.
Yeah, all right.
Justice Samuel Alito is disagreeing with his colleagues on the Supreme Court after a ruling that temporarily halts deportation flights under the Alien Enemies Act. Alito sent out his dissent after the High Court agreed to block any additional flights that would deport migrants to a prison in El Salvador. Alito saying the court issued unprecedented and legally questionable relief without giving lower courts a chance to rule, without hearing from the opposing party, and without providing any explanation. A spokesperson says Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem had her bag stolen Sunday in Washington, D.C. She carries a lot of money in there. Noem confirming the news Monday, saying the matter is unresolved. The bag taken while she was eating dinner with family, and security camera video shows a white man wearing a medical mask walking away from the restaurant with the bag. It contained her driver's license, her medication, her apartment keys, a passport, DHS access badge, and about $3,000 in cash. The Secret Service is now launching an investigation. So she's walking around with some big money there, Kristi Noem.
Right. I would not want to be that guy if he's caught. But that said, they would never deport a white guy. So
I guess he's safe.
Who carries $3,000 around? Unless she was going to a casino, which then, of course,
you never know. In the city of Oakland, here in the Bay Area, Barbara Lee will be sworn in as the next mayor. The former East Bay congresswoman was deemed the winner of the special election over the weekend when former Oakland City Councilman Lauren Taylor called Lee to congratulate her and concede the race. The ballots do still need to be certified. Lee and Taylor were running for the mayor's office previously held by Sheng Tao, who was recalled late last fall. Lee told supporters she has multiple priorities for her first 90 days in office. Public safety is at the top of her to-do list. In San Jose, Silicon Valley area, there are dozens of people that need to find a new place to live. The city will begin clearing out a large encampment of RVs along Alviso Milpitas Road as Microsoft prepares to build its data plan center in the area. They're being bumped for Microsoft. Housing advocates are furious, saying there hasn't been enough effort made to find places for these unhoused people and their RVs to go. The city officials say they began posting notifications at the start of the month that these RVs would have to move on down the road. They are out. In the Los Angeles area, Mayor Karen Bass is scheduled to deliver her State of the City address today. Bass's office says the speech will focus on wildfire recovery, budget challenges, a homeless crisis, public safety, and federal policies that are impacting public affairs as well. Police in Los Angeles say a bike riding suspect allegedly cut down trees in downtown Los Angeles. The LAPD says surveillance video shows the suspect wearing all dark clothing, riding up to a tree along Grand Avenue and chopping it down with a chainsaw. I was thinking how hard it would be to ride a bike and carry a chainsaw at the same time. I mean, I'll give the guy some props there. The police say
It's tough at first, but then you get used to it.
You kind of get the balance after a while.
Yeah.
The suspect apparently went down the line, sawing trees as the person went, describing this as an act of vandalism. 5 trees toppled in all, and the mayor, Karen Bass, calls it beyond comprehensible and says that these shade trees will be displaced. So it's a tree scandal. Oh, no. Sweden's hit reality show is live. It offers viewers great nature shots of the Great Moose Migration. It starts today, airing on Sweden's public service television. The live stream follows the moose migration on a path they've taken for thousands of years to summer grazing pastures. The show airs nonstop for 20 days, following the moose with remote cameras and drones as they make their way through forests and swim across rivers. Last year's stream drew 9 million viewers of people watching the moose migration. So this is a very popular situation there.
Yeah, I would definitely tune in. I mean, there are distractions to everything else that's going on. And that gives you how many days is that? 20 days?
20 days. 20 days of peace and inner peace with watching the moose migration. Yeah,
peace
absolutely.
Meese, even though meese is not the plural of moose, but yeah.
This report sponsored by CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. Organic beans, fresh roast, sourced from female-owned farms. The CoachellaValleyCoffee.com website is super easy to navigate. It'll tell you exactly what you're going to order tastes like. There are great tasting notes for the tea and for the coffee. It's really worth checking out. And just for being an exclusive Mark Thompson Show listener, you get an extra 10% off. So when you get to the code box, type in Mark T, no spaces, Mark T, and that'll get you 10% off of this amazing coffee and teas. And they arrive really quick. They send it really fast, and often they'll send it with a few extras. So CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. I'm Kim McAllister, and this is the Mark Thompson Show featuring Michael Shure.
Well, it's thank you, Kim, for the news. Thank you, Coachella Valley Coffee. I don't have a mug yet. I still don't have a mug. I don't have a mug. But the best thing about that news was the moose. And I think what we should do in this next hour, we have David Weigel joining us at the bottom of the hour, but I think we should look and talk a little bit about what is going on with immigration, what is going on with the Supreme Court. You mentioned the dissent of Justice Alito. It is not at all surprising, and having those dissents is part of having a court. The point is, he was in the minority this time. And I think you have to look whenever Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, or ordinarily when they're in the minority, they're together in that minority, trying to push back on, or push back on what they see as encroachments into their conservative agenda, because they do have, both of them, an agenda on the court, which is what you're not supposed to have. But I think the modern day Supreme Court is full of agenda on both sides. So that's just my 2 cents on it. But I think when you look at Alito's dissent, you have to you see why Donald Trump needs to be so grateful to people like Sam Alito, because he's talking about exactly what Trump is saying. He wants the courts, even though lower courts have ruled in this, he wants it to be interpreted in a different way. When they're supposed to look at precedent, they're supposed to look at rulings. What I was able to glean from Alito's dissent was not just this sort of philosophy. It was actually making it up, because lower courts have ruled on this already. And the back and forth that the courts are having on this issue, whether it be Boasberg's court or whether it be the Supreme Court, on issues of immigration and how the administration has gone in an extrajudicial direction, I think it shows that there are some people within the court. I mean, he's saying it's unprecedented, right? Isn't that the word that Alito used? He said, in the middle of the night, the court issued an unprecedented and legally questionable relief without giving the lower courts a chance to rule, without hearing from the opposing party, within 8 hours of receiving the application with dubious factual support for its order, and without providing any explanation for its order. Well, when they do these emergency orders, it's so insincere and for Alito to say that they just did it with 8 hours. That's what an emergency order is. That's what happens. I mean, Alito and Thomas, both of them are conservatives, right? They dissented immediately. They dissented as quickly as the court ruled, and so yes, you do have that much time, very little time, when you're asking the Supreme Court for some kind of an injunction, and so to say that they acted hastily, that's what these are. These are emergency injunctions. If you put stitches in someone when they come into the emergency room, you act hastily. That's exactly what this is, and it is. It's problematic for members of the Supreme Court to actually criticize the way the court operates and blame that for why the ruling was bad. And will courts continue to look at these things? Of course. But also, we have to look at the fact the Supreme Court and what they're saying hasn't seemed to matter. And this kind of posture that the administration is taking with the courts, and with the Supreme Court most especially, is disturbing to a lot of people who watch the courts.
Yeah, Inlays makes the point, as you just said, that Alito dissented because it was midnight, which you say par for the course, right? Trump must comply. Alito's dissent was literally finding against. I don't necessarily know that Alito was disagreeing with the ruling, just the timing of it, which is interesting, because you'd think he would know better. Is that a gimmick?
Well, I think he's disagreeing with the ruling too, but he's disagreeing with it by also blaming the timing of it. He's saying, well, we need the lower courts to decide. Well, the highest court is deciding because of what the lower courts have basically been doing or not doing, and that's why it gets sent to a higher court in an emergency way. So I think that there is a real issue here with how someone who's been a member of this Supreme Court for a very long time can blame something that has nothing to do with the ruling at hand, and especially when many of his conservative colleagues, I shouldn't say many, there are only 9 people on the court in the first place, but you have Gorsuch, you have Coney Barrett, and you have the Chief Justice Roberts, who voted with the 3 Democrats there. So it's to me, it's not. I should say not conservatives. I shouldn't say Democrats. I misspoke, and Kavanaugh as well on that side. So I think that it's more about criticizing the institution, which is the last gasp of a desperate man in this instance for me.
They have a bunch of different rulings coming out on immigration and deportation. The other story I saw was that the deportations can start up, that the judges say they really can't stop it. They really can't. They are stopping the deportations under this Aliens Enemies Act, which is this 18th century wartime law. They say, and this is the same case where they dissented, they in the emergency appeal. They say, we are deeply relieved the court has temporarily blocked the removals. These individuals were in imminent danger of spending the rest of their lives in a brutal Salvadoran prison without ever having due process. That's a note from the ACLU on this case, which kind of goes back to what you were talking earlier about due process. At least, and it with people feeling, maybe this is just myself feeling, that questions about whether the Supreme Court would stand up for what was right or whether they would just bend a knee to Trump and go along with whatever he wanted. It feels good to see them supporting due process. I don't know if there was a way they couldn't have supported it, but it feels like I don't know, like we might have a fighting chance if the Supreme Court is at least standing up in these cases.
Yeah, that's true. And it's interesting too, because I think that the Supreme Court and some of its members might also be really pissed at Donald Trump for defying its ruling earlier in the Garcia case. And so when it gets to another case and it gets to different immigrants and deportation, they don't want to acquiesce to a president who's not respecting their ruling. And that was a unanimous ruling. So I can't imagine, and I don't know this for a fact, so I could just be imagining, but I can't imagine that there is none of that comes into play for at least a couple of the justices here. That, hey, we have this job. We are the high court. We made a ruling. You are defying the ruling. You are ignoring the ruling. So we're not going to give you anything else. I don't know that that's happening, but I'm a human being. They're human beings. I know how human beings react in these situations. It's got to have some kind of an effect, I would guess.
There's a story today where Trump is threatening the prosecution for fact-based reporting on the Abrego Garcia case. He says the justice system should retaliate against those who deviate from his message. He said on Truth Social, this is this part of the Sunday thing, those lying to the American people on behalf of violent criminals have to be held responsible by the agencies and by the courts. So we can tell the truth about, as we know it, about Abrego Garcia, but if that truth deviates from the message that Trump is trying to push, then he wants journalists, whoever speaks out against him, punished. That's pretty scary stuff.
Yeah. It is scary stuff. It's consistent, though. It's this authoritarian. It's what flirts with 1940s Germany. It is all the hallmarks of a dictatorship, from a man who said he wanted to be a dictator on day one, but only for a day. I don't know what day this is, but we're 3 months into his term, and he continues this kind of a posture. And the courts are supposed to be the sort of the last block on that. And if he defies the courts, look, they're going to be ruling. The Supreme Court, I would imagine, this week is going to give a more proper ruling on what the emergency ruling said. And if Alito is consistent with what he wrote, well, with a little more time, he should side with the majority of the court. But he's not going to, I would predict. And so that Trump is getting what he wants by taking this posture. And until he doesn't, and we've seen him not get it, and still he perseveres through that. And that's what's going on right now with the Garcia case. That's what's going on with this case that's sort of in limbo right now at the court with that emergency intervention. So you're going to be seeing a lot more of this until people start calling him out. Well, now you're starting to see that in very, very small drips and drabs from Republicans in Congress Congress, both on, you've had senators who have said, I think it was John Kennedy from Louisiana, who said, if the court rules this way, the administration has to respect what the court is saying, even though those aren't his politics. So it seems unimportant. It may be a voice in the wilderness, but that's exactly what you need to start seeing in order for people from within his own party to push back on what's going on with Trump. And they will become more comfortable doing it the more of them do it, and the more time passes, and the less Donald Trump has as a future of the Republican Party, even though he says he wants to run in 2028. I don't think he could beat Obama in 2028. So
no. I can't wait to get your opinion on this next story, because it's related to immigration as well. And it's about whether or not this case of this man, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, is some type of distraction from larger issues. We talked about the economy, and that's what Governor Gavin Newsom is saying. I don't know if this is a way for Governor Gavin Newsom to ingratiate himself more toward the right, or whether he really believes this, but he's criticizing all of this of Kilmar Abrego Garcia attention, saying that it's taking away from the real issues at hand. And Senator Van Hollen, who went to El Salvador to visit Mr. Abrego Garcia, responded. So we have video of that. And I think it's an interesting philosophical conversation. I'd love to hear your comments. Go ahead, Tony. I think we've got it. Hopefully we've got it. This is Senator Van Hollen responding to what Governor Gavin Newsom has to say.
On Governor Gavin Newsom of California calling Mr. Abrego Garcia's case, quote, the distraction of the day. He argues Democrats are playing right into the hands of President Trump, an issue he wants to be focused on. How do you respond to Governor Newsom?
I don't think it's ever wrong to stand up for the Constitution. And this is not about one man. If you deny the constitutional rights of one man, you threaten the constitutional rights for everybody. I think Americans are tired of elected officials or politicians who are all finger to the wind, what's blowing this way, what's blowing that way. And anybody who can't stand up for the Constitution and the right of due process doesn't deserve to lead.
On Governor Gavin Newsom of
Yeah. So I don't know. What do you feel? Do you feel that that's true, that we're focusing way too much on Mr. Abrego Garcia and that it's distracting us from the real issues at hand, or is the Constitution issue number one?
Well, I don't necessarily agree with Newsom that we're spending too much time on it. While I do agree that it's a distraction, because everything is a distraction, right? The Trump administration and Trump world thrives on chaos. And so doing this creates chaos and creates distraction. Distraction from what? I don't know. Distraction from the fact that these tariffs are scaring people. They're scaring the markets. Distraction from the fact that employment is not, where it needs to be, according to the promises of Trump, that egg prices are not where they need to be according to the promises of Trump. The practical day-to-day stuff, it is a distraction from that. But I don't think that, so is everything. The Pope died today. That's a distraction from other news. So I don't necessarily think it's bad. And I think it's probably an important, I don't think it's probably, it is definitely an important conversation to be having, because what has it created? It's created this scenario where the Supreme Court of the United States of America made a ruling that the President of the United States of America, until now, right now, continues to defy. And they say they're taking their time trying to figure out how to do it. This was not Brown versus Board of Education. This was not all deliberate speed. This was, no, this guy's got to come home. The administration, it is incumbent upon them to find out when he's coming home, how he's coming home, and he's got to come home. And then what happens when he gets here, that's according to the law of the United States, not according to the law of El Salvador or the whims of a U.S. president. So I think it creates a very, very interesting conversation that we should all be having about what the powers of the judiciary are and powers of the executive, and how they're being ignored. So I don't agree with Governor Newsom on that. I also think that people are allowed to be wrong, right? You could love Governor Newsom or not, and agree with him on politics. If you agree, if you never disagree with him, that's unnatural. There are going to be things that you disagree with him on, and still think he might be great or might be horrible because you agree with him on one thing. So that doesn't. This is a distraction. Spending too much time on what Governor Newsom is. So.
Well, I'm fascinated
and Governor
by.
Newsom he has ambition too. One would
Yeah.
presume. And so we look cynically and think that there's a calculation with everything he says, and there just may be, because that's the business he's in. But and I'd never criticize someone for that. If you want to be president of the United States, if you want to be governor, you have to be careful about what you say. And so I don't criticize him for that, but I don't think he's right that this is, we're spending too much time discussing this. I think it's maybe the most important story being told right now.
Well, it goes against, in my mind, what Governor Gavin Newsom used to be about. This would have been an issue that he would have been passionate about, that he would have championed. And so why is he taking this tack? And I think you kind of mentioned about his aspirations, and I wonder if he has to give up the core of who he is, the soul of the liberal inside of him, in order to appeal to a wider audience. And is that wise? Because it's that passion that made people like him in the first place.
I think we're reading too much into it. I think it's just, in this case, it's an unimportant. When Gavin Newsom, if he were to run for president and announce in a year and a half that he's running for president, people are not going to sit and talk about how he said that we were being, distracted by the Abrego Garcia case. We won't remember Abrego Garcia's name in a year and a half. There'll have been that many news cycles, and it'll be more than a year and a half too, because it'll probably be the beginning of 2027 that he announces. So I don't know. I've seen it happen too many times in watching politics and following it and covering it, that people say things. It doesn't take away from who Gavin Newsom is. He has even admitted, saying that he needs to expose himself more to people who disagree with him. He needs to go to the red counties of California. He needs to go to the places that voted for Trump. That is, of course, he has an agenda,
Yeah.
And but I don't know. I think speaking up is fine. I think we were talking about Newsom and Bonta earlier. I think making some noise is okay. If this is his opinion, that's fine. But I don't think that he is soft on immigration or too harsh on immigration because of this. I just think that he thinks we're spending too much time and it's taking us away from the kitchen table issues, perhaps. I don't agree with him.
I saw a story, speaking of immigration, this out of not the Supreme Court, but a federal judge on Friday in Boston, who issued a preliminary injunction preventing ICE from deporting people to places not spelled out in their order without raising concerns about their safety. So you can't be deported to a country other than the one you're from. You can't, they're blocking deportations from third nations, or to third nations without hearings, which is interesting, because I don't know if that affects this whole prison in El Salvador thing. But what would be the legal reasoning given, say, if I came from, I don't know, let's pick somewhere great like Tahiti. Say I came from Tahiti and they're sending me back to, I don't know, pick a country. That doesn't seem right. Aren't you usually deported back from whence you came?
Yes, you are. I mean, that's generally the way it goes, and I'm not going to pretend to know the exact law here, but the deals that are made with non-citizens, I don't think there are extradition, judicial extradition treaties that are in place with different countries, and Tahiti being part of France, I think we'd probably extradite you if you committed a crime. But if as far as what the laws are for immigrants, I don't know that they're written in stone in that way. And because you are not someone from, in the eyes of that, you are not someone from this country or another country. And in fact, there are probably people who would paint the picture as, well, we can't send this person back to Tahiti because they were being persecuted in Tahiti. So
Sure.
we'll send them, to Guyana, because in Guyana they won't be persecuted and they won't suffer the pain of return. I don't.
Yeah.
Get me one thing that's important to say is I don't think that's the motivation here, by the
No.
way. But if you strip it down, that could be a reason not to send someone back to Tahiti who came here from Tahiti illegally if they're under some sort of threat, but we don't want them in our country for whatever reason.
It's interesting that these things are all coming up now. That I would have thought all of this would have been settled law. And
Yeah.
so it's just fascinating that we're moving so fast and furiously to try to deport all these people. Who even cares where they're being sent? Just get them out of America. That now this becomes, there's legal case. I can't even keep track of how many immigration cases and laws are being set right now based on precedent of legal cases that are happening right under our noses.
Yeah, there's a lot to keep track of now, and we also hear about these things in ways we've never heard with such a velocity that we've never had to deal with before. And so much is happening. I mean, that's what I was talking about. He's sown so much chaos because that's his MO. That it's hard to keep up with everything. It's hard not to be distracted. I mean, to go back to what Governor Newsom said, it's hard not to be distracted by constant distraction, right? I mean, we were talking about the message that he sent on Easter. That's a distraction too, but we fell victim to it, right? And I'm sitting here reading it verbatim, and then I realized, well, what am I doing, right? I mean, that's the definition of distraction, and it's worked for me,
There's another case, and this has to do with the press. This judge is declining to further enforce the order, restoring the Associated Press's access to the White House. So Trump and company blocked the AP from covering White House and press pool events. And the Supreme Court says, I think it was the Supreme Court, you can't do that. They need to be given access. And so then they go back and they try to get into an Oval Office event, and they're again blocked. And they're told, you can't be here, the Associated Press. You got to go. And now the courts are refusing to enforce the original order. A federal judge, not the Supreme Court. My apologies. And it's this whole idea of court orders being unenforceable that has me very worried.
Right. And why, how is this happening? When we have deferred to the courts in this country, I mean, that's what we are, a nation of laws in our sort of hokiest, at our hokiest moments, we are a nation of laws, and we always to interpret that Constitution. And so when that fails, or when they do it and there's no enforcement, now the courts are not about enforcement, right? I mean, so it's up to the court. And I think that was McFadden was the judge's name. So it's like, it's up to the court to make the ruling, but once the ruling's made, I can only do so much. I can't go in there. Now the AP can, and the AP and others can continue to go to the courts and say they're not abiding by it. And then there's a different way of going about it. But the judge said there are consequences. They could be held in contempt, right? It would be problematic. So that's what do we do? Then we hold them in contempt. There are threats of contempt to the administration on the Abrego Garcia case. So it just continues down that path. But it's discomforting when you hear all of these rulings coming out of courts, federal courts, and they're just being ignored by the people who are targeted.
Yeah. I think that your guest has arrived, and so it's time to turn the page.
All right, we will turn the page away from the AP, and we will be welcoming David Weigel. David's a peer, and I think one of the great political writers of this crazy generation of politics that we're living through. He also, I get a lot of books from people I know who wrote them. I buy them, but I read Dave's because he wrote a book on prog rock, progressive rock, and is a lifelong progressive rock fan and Genesis fan. Oh, wait, did we lose me? What the hell's going on? Do we have me?
Yeah, we're good, man. Michael, you there?
Yeah,
Kim?
you're good. You're good. I hear
Wait,
you.
We see you fine.
Frozen. Oh, do we have me? You see
Yeah,
me? Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Everything's
hear you.
good on this
Okay.
end.
Well, it was frozen
good.
on my end. I thought
Oh.
maybe we were getting to Dave right when I started
Yeah.
talking about Genesis. This is what happened. But do we have Dave? Am I correct? Is he here
Yeah.
with us?
He's here. There he is. Yay.
All right. So Dave. Yeah, there's Dave. Dave, thanks for being with us. Dave is a reporter for Semafor and has covered this world of politics, like I was saying, if you could hear me, for quite a while, and done it better, I think, than just about anybody out there. So Dave, there's so much to talk about. We've been talking about the Abrego Garcia case. We've been talking about the courts. In your reporting, before we get into some of the stuff you've been covering lately, there's a lot of fear from the man on the street that the administration is not listening to the courts. What do you say to somebody through your reporting? How would you answer that question when someone says, "What happens now? Where are we going now?"
This is the theme of everything Trump is trying, and just to reduce it to the basics. Uh, the administration can act with unlimited resources paid for by taxpayers. If you are sued by them, even if you win and you're in the right, you will pay lots of money. If you are detained, even if you're unjustly detained and you were in the right, it's going to take a long time to get justice for that, and for anything that you lost in that process. So, the what people are grappling with is an administration that is willing to use not just executive powers, but the police powers, law enforcement powers to um, detain people incorrectly, wrongly, deport them to El Salvador and the CICOT prison incorrectly, and not respond to a court that tells them to stop. That's been the pattern. Not to overgeneralize. I'm just saying this is the worry I see when I was at a protest in San Antonio over the weekend, talking to Democrats at town halls last week, talking to Republicans too. But very little worry is coming from Republicans. A lot of the worry is coming from Democrats, and the Republicans, I think, have either, in my observation, either adjusted their view of executive power, or have always felt this way, that we need a strong uh, leader and willingness to break some heads in law enforcement if we're going to reverse liberalism.
In that vein, and talking and just respond to what you were just saying, there has been a little pleasure with John Kennedy, the senator from Louisiana, saying that, at a certain point, the president's going to have to essentially listen to what the court is saying. How contagious is that sentiment among Republicans? And should anybody look at what John Kennedy's saying, any Democrat really look at what John Kennedy's saying, or Republican, and either be happy or worry about what he's saying?
Yeah, I've seen two Republican responses specifically to the idea of moving a U.S. citizen to CICOT or to a foreign prison. And this is the thing. These are tactics from the war on terror. These are 24 at this point year old tactics that no president has given up, that Congress hasn't taken away. So that people are used to them in a different context, in the context of we are moving people who, don't worry, we consider them dangerous for terrorism reasons, and saying, well, MS-13 is a terror group. Any of these people who we're apprehending could be terrorists. Therefore, let's get them all out. And you've seen from Republicans either a worry that deporting U.S. citizens could go too far, or you've heard this from Jeff Van Drew of New Jersey, who I highlight a lot because he was elected as a conservative Democrat, and he switched parties because he was so angry about the Trump impeachment in 2019. He now supports everything Trump does and just says, yeah, just go along with what he's doing. That is more common for Republicans either to not react, because remember the Congress is out right now. It is not returning until after next week, for after its Easter recess. The Republicans who have chosen to speak out mostly are saying, well, at least the president is trying to do something. And the easiest part to condemn is is the idea of a U.S. citizen being taken out, but not completely. You're not seeing unanimity with that, with opposition to that idea. You're definitely seeing some support for the idea of using every tool the federal government has to silence speech and criticism by Americans.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time specifically. I mean, this small window of time we're living through, because we're seeing for the very first time in many of our lives anyway that the whole idea of how what happens when you defy the courts, and what happens politically as well. You know, what posture do some politicians take? You spoke with Connor Lamb. I was reading in Semafor before, you know, when you said, yeah, you could come on the show, I kind of skimmed that. I hadn't read it before. Connor Lamb's a former member of Congress from a kind of purplish part of Pennsylvania, if I remember, because I remember covering him when he was in Congress. And he's talking about these the CCOP prisons as gulags, and what is the cumulative effect, do you think, about Democrats, whether it be Connor Lamb or Cory Booker doing a filibuster, or Gavin Newsom and Rob Bonta in California suing the administration? What is the cumulative effect when there can be no practical effect right now in politics?
Well, most of what Democrats are responding with are NGOs that sue the federal government for all sorts of reasons, but they're pretty unified on this through Democracy Forward. And those attorneys general, Democratic attorneys general, most of them are elected, a couple are appointed by governors, and they also can use their state resources to act freely. And so the totality is that there's a lot of litigating the administration has to deal with in courts around the country, and it has a unified response, which is one, uh, saying that this is illegitimate and the judges who rule against them are illegitimate. And two, kind of counting on some House Republicans, although we'll see how far this goes. House Republicans uh, have almost unanimously be behind legislation to prevent federal judges from putting injunctions on what the Trump administration does, mirroring the lawsuit that is working its way to the Supreme Court. They want to limit the power of anyone who sues the government um, to stop what it's doing. Basically, that's the totality of it. There is this. If you look at everything the Trump administration is doing, if it was victorious in all of its arguments about what people can and can't sue over, or what people can and can't resist, then it would give a lot of power to any president, any future president. For example, Barack Obama was stymied a couple times by trying to implement something and having it halted with a nationwide injunction by a federal judge. Republicans want to make it so that no president ever has to worry about that again. I mean, you can do something, and if it's illegal, people have to wait until the Supreme Court decides whether it is or not. Not some federal judge saying this cannot be acted on until the case is over. Uh, and that is so there's a goal here of giving the executive branch more room to move on things that would, I, by what I'm describing, would probably be struck down, be illegal, be unable to continue by the federal government. And the idea is, well, you can do a lot before you lose in court. That's the overall goal here. What can the administration do before it loses in court? And by the way, we in the president's party think courts stopping the president are basically acting wrongly in the first place. They shouldn't have that power.
Right. Well, that's the when you get to the thing that really disturbs a lot of people, Americans, independents, Democrats, whomever, is that just sort of defying the courts because you don't think that it should be that way, when in fact it's written to be that way until it's not. This unanimity among House Republicans, predictively, sort of based on your experience covering the House and covering the sport, do you see a break in that? And what would cause the break? Whether it's the timing, whether it's the lame duckness of Trump, who pretends he's never going to be a lame duck, or says he's not going to be. Where do you see a break in that dam?
You do see the beginnings of this with let's imagine that there are people who are apprehended for some other offense. Let's say it's one of these people that the DOJ is throwing the book at, who attack a Tesla dealership. You're not allowed to burn down a dealership. You're not allowed to blow somebody's car up. However, you are usually processed in American court if you do that in America. Let's say one of those people was sent to seek out. Would that be a breaking point for Republicans? I think for some it would, not for all of them. The idea here, and uh, there's been a lot of writing on this for years. The most influential thinkers of what the Trump administration's doing are very some of them neo monarchists, but very supportive of a powerful executive that can use its abilities to uh, punish foreign actors or Americans who they think are trying to undermine the country from within. If you go back to Trump's speeches and he talks about rooting out the communists and the Marxists, he wasn't saying rooting out the foreign communists and Marxists. He was saying the government should be working to make it impossible to organize against the success of the executive branch, in so many words. And so the keep reading the arguments for this. It's what is the point in America? Why should we have people trying to, let's say, undermine prayer in school, undermine um, investing in Israel, just all the sorts of priorities that conservatives have that are halted by secular progressives. Well, why do we let that happen in the first place? What kind of punishments are available for people who do that? Uh, why should your organization be allowed to, with tax exemptions, raise lots of money to oppose with the federal government? What if you're punished for doing that? And there's a lot of strength they're trying to hand over to the DOJ in order to make it harder to resist the government. And you premise of this conversation, I think, premise of your show is that this is unconstitutional, and that's what's going on. Is let's stretch the limits of the Constitution. I'm not doing a comparison with what the Obama administration did, um, but some of the arguments on the Republican, I shouldn't say Republican, but on the conservative side for this is, well, in their view, Obama did some things that they thought were unconstitutional and he got away with them. So let's try some stuff that everyone thinks is unconstitutional. Let's try the easiest one. I mean, the first one, I should say, not the easiest, was let's go and reinterpret the 14th Amendment and get the Supreme Court to interpret it in a way that would allow us to not give citizenship to most people born in America. That's the most basic one they've started with, but it's one of many ideas that have been accepted in our current political process, current political arrangement, and they say, why? Well, why is it? Why can't we just
Right.
find a court to strike that down, or ignore the court until the our opposition is exhausted? Maybe everyone at the law firm or everyone at the think tank is laid off by the time they have convinced a judge that we couldn't do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it always comes back. It's sort of the filibuster argument, right? That they don't want to get rid of the filibuster. They want to be able to use it because they're afraid the other side doesn't. And so you would think at a certain point they would try and create some kind of a ceasefire here that would make it more difficult, because Republicans, when there's a Democratic president, don't want to see this happen either. So it just seems, common sense would dictate that at some point some cooler heads, I don't know that there are cool heads anymore, but that they would perhaps sit down and try and work this out, or realize that it might not be the best tack to take because of the fact that it could come back and haunt them later on. But before you go, I want to ask you, because a lot of viewers of the Mark Thompson show are concerned that Democrats aren't doing anything, and the practicality is that in the House, even though they're the best time is when the House is in recess for Democrats, because they're sort of being paralyzed is not as apparent. But, and I say that obviously tongue in cheek, but the notion that there is a plan. Do you get the feeling that they are working on responding and a path forward that is different than the one that they've been on?
Who's the they? I heard the question, but who is
Democrats. I mean, Democratic leadership,
Oh, yeah.
the Democratic Party, sort of writ large in Congress.
Oh, yeah. Well, they're pretty transparent about this. They can't do anything with the House unless they convince three Republicans to vote with them and stop something. They can't do anything with the Senate unless they convince three or four Republicans to stop something. They are relying on courts to stop it. And one thing you've actually seen from Republicans, not to deflect from the question, as part of it is. Or treating like a scandal the idea that Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer are talking to state attorneys general That there is for example, Jeffries launched this litigation working group pretty early in the Trump presidency, and the goal of that was having some way to connect members of Congress to the state AGs and groups suing Trump. Republicans talk about that like it's a scandal. There is a Democratic conspiracy to stop Trump. This happened. This happens every presidency. There's usually different stakes than there are right now. Um, what is the goal there for Republicans? It's up to Trump, really. How many executive orders can he issue saying that, let's say, Crew, for example, is not allowed to sue him,
Yeah.
or that its employees are going to be punished for doing it? But the Democratic response is, and I've seen this really 48 hours ago. I was in Texas with Greg Casar, the head of the Progressive Caucus in the House, and he explained what I just told you, and still got three very frustrated questions from the audience about why can't you do something else? What is there more you can do in the House? Why can't you stop this further? People have this is the minority always deals with this. During
Yeah.
the Tea Party era, the 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 only tool that Republicans had that was effective against the Affordable Care Act was the Senate 60 vote threshold on major legislation. Like they didn't have the ability to stop it in the House. They were just trying to convert Democrats to vote against it. This always happens. The party that lost the House election, the Senate elections, always unable to stop things. But you have seen a lot of anger from their base, and this effort by the leadership of the party to say, look, no one likes this. It's more fun to win an election. It feels more legit to win an election than to win a lawsuit. But we have to rely on lawsuits until we win the House and the Senate back. That's what they tell people. So it's actually how does it compare to what they've done in the past? One, this legal infrastructure is much more robust. They had it in the first Trump administration, but this is much more coordinated. Again, which Republicans treat like a scandal. Uh, and two, they're not as reactive to, let's say, activist demands. One thing I've been focused on just very narrowly in the last day is that you're seeing activists now show up and say ICE is out of control. Why can't Democrats do something to fund it or abolish it or whatever? And 8 years ago, Democrats said, well, that's an idea. Let's talk about it. And they'll now say, no, we've learned from the past that you need to be really strategic. You can't have a slogan that leads to a backlash. You can't say you can achieve something that can't actually be achieved. You don't want to introduce a bill that just goes nowhere. So let's be more careful. And so they're being careful. And the only downside thus far has been anger from Democrats that they're not doing more. That's manifested when you look at this polling, Gallup's polling, most recently, but I think NBC News too. The Democrats' approval rating, CNN, I should say, not NBC, is below 30%. Most of that change from 2 years ago is Democrats who like to vote for Democrats and probably will in the midterms, saying these guys suck, these guys are losers, they're not doing anything.
Right.
And how do they fix that? They, like, win something, like even winning in Wisconsin, the Supreme Court race there, very high stakes, very expensive race. It proved that Democrats were not on the mat, that they could turn out people and better than Republicans. That didn't give them more than, I don't know, 48 hours of a respite from this.
No, it didn't. And also the other thing to be gleaned from that in Wisconsin and some of the other things is that MAGA is hard to motivate if Trump isn't running and if it's not a presidential, and it creates.
And even right now, telling them like, "Hey, everybody, go out and vote and remove judges who hate Trump." Like that's what the argument was in Wisconsin, and it wasn't that compelling to people. Not to interrupt you, but just agree.
Yeah,
with
no, you're agreeing with me, which is even better.
Mhm.
So so that's good. And there is this sort of in sports. You want to fire the coach. If your team's losing, you fire the coach, We got to make a change. We got to fire the coach. And I see it all the time being a sports fan. And it drives me crazy, right? Because you have to change the losing that the players are doing. But Democrats are starting to say, we got to get rid of our leadership. We just got Jeffries, maybe not him as much as Schumer. And there's this sort of outcry that we need the voices of Brian Schatz and Chris Murphy and Cory Booker and things like that to be leading this party. Is there any groundswell to that? I promised you that the last one was the last question. I just, when you were
That's
talking,
fine. I do the same thing.
I thought about that. Is there, what do you think?
It's a good last question. No, I think for Democrats to get their base excited, they just need to win some stuff, and they're not going to win more high profile stuff until November because they're New Jersey and Virginia races. They feel good about them, but convincing them that what they're doing is working, they get very short term victory. And not to get too big picture about the operation here, but every administration gets elected. They promise a lot of things. They can't do it all, because they were usually trying to be strategic and not violate court order. We've had 100 days, we'll have more of administration that moves first, knowing that somebody's going to sue and try to stop them and says this is anti-democratic. You're seeing basically the rhetoric of democracy and being democratic and being responsive to people being used to justify acting for the president. And you've seen this rhetoric from Republicans, consistently. You mentioned Kennedy, but the overall approach, case by Republicans is that the American people voted for Donald Trump. Any judge or any sort of impediment to him is undermining the will of the American people. Very convenient now. Wasn't what they said in 2020, but it's what they say now.
Yes.
And how do you defy that? It's, well, in order to be sort of in equilibrium with Republicans, you just need to win the midterms and say, okay, we've had a presidential election, we've had a House election. There still is an idea here, that's very old, that the sovereign, the one person who most people voted for, is imbued with most of our power. Therefore, the system should bend to his will. It has never been that powerful inside one party. You did not see that when Barack Obama was president. You didn't see you saw it with DACA, is the closest analog I could think of, where people said, look, legally, you can do with presidential power, with the delegation of what cases we do and take up in immigration law, you can do a lot as president that can't be stopped. But there was always a little bit of a nervousness about how some future president might use that power, and there really isn't now. So
Right.
rhetorically, you've got Republicans saying the will of the people says let Trump do what he wants, and you have Democrats saying the will of the Constitution blocks some of this. That's not the will of the people. They are saying outright that, look, this is majoritarianism, and demanding what you want is not the way to run the country. That's good. That's dangerous. That'll backfire at some point. But when the next time they have some Democratic mandate to stop that is not till November 2026.
Yeah, and we will keep watching that. Dave, look for him on Semafor. Subscribe to his newsletter. I promise you will be smarter about all of this just from reading that once or twice a week. So, Dave Weigel, thanks for coming on to the Mark Thompson Show, and I will hope to see you out on the road soon.
Thank you so much. Good to be here.
Great. So we move on now. Yeah, we can give him the Mark Thompson Show applause.
Yeah, we.
So look, we got an emergency injunction from Semafor there, and we were able to get a guest at the last minute. So
I love it.
Not only that, we got Dave Weigel, who's just so terrific, and literally makes me smarter every time I read his stuff. So we're glad we had him, and Kim, we are
we're wrapping it up, but I got an email.
Yeah,
I got an email from Mark Thompson with this story, so I thought I'd bring it up to you on our way out the door.
From
Mark Thompson. Mark Thompson. You know, the guy who.
Okay.
Who is that guy?
Go with it. I'm not on the show a lot, so I don't know all the viewers and listeners. So go ahead.
He sends us this story about infighting in the White House. And he says that this White House has become, or the article says, that the White House has become increasingly divided in record time. There are thoughts that throughout American history, according to MSNBC's Steve Bannon, that there have been administrations with rival factions within, but usually it kind of takes time to see those factions pull apart and develop within an administration. But on Team Trump, according to Mr. Bannon, the cracks are bursting into view just 3 months after Inauguration Day. That there's infighting in the White House that we haven't seen happen so quickly before.
Yeah, that's fascinating stuff. Steve Bannon's really smart. He's not Steve Bannon, just to be clear about that. He and I were both on the panel. Yeah, we were on Ali Velsh's show fairly recently, and I kept Steve Bannon. But I think that that's probably true. But I don't know. I can't speak to whether or not there's infighting. I know there was infighting over a lot of people expected Susie Wiles to kind of be this buffer between some of the crazy that we knew came with Donald Trump and Donald Trump himself, and to kind of work that out. That doesn't always work out, right? I mean, the people that don't want to be buffered often take it out on the buffer. The president himself wants to hear from the people who are being buffered. So that doesn't work. So it makes perfect sense to me that there would be this infighting based on that alone. I do know that during some of the confirmation hearings and some of the nominations that were made, there was infighting too over Kennedy and Hegseth particularly. But that's normal, right? I mean, that is, you're never going to get unanimity, and most presidents don't want it. I don't know if this one does, but most presidents, I mean, Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote a book called Team of Rivals. I mean, Lincoln wanted to have dissent. Bill Clinton in modern times wanted to have dissent within his in his inner circle. So that's something that you do want. Dissent does not equal chaos, does not equal infighting. It just means dissent. And the people who lose in those arguments know that that's going to happen sometimes. I don't know what's going on in this White House, but I do know that it may come to the fore now that we're seeing these problems with Pete Hegseth, that people are now starting behind the president's back. They're members of Congress. There are Republicans who are saying that Hegseth was a big mistake. And so the more that happens, you're going to get that infighting between people who want to protect Hegseth from within the White House and people who never thought he should have been there in the first place. So we'll see what happens with him. But that's the sort of typical infighting you're having when there is somebody who is under, a microscope and is involved in scandal, where you have a president who wants to protect that person, and the people are saying now it's time to cut bait. So I think when you hear these stories come out, it's not surprising. It is very soon. Steve Bannon is right about that. It's just been a few months, and to have this kind of infighting, but by the same token, this White House particularly puts out so many things. They create, as we've talked about in this show, so much chaos. There are always things being talked about, so there's more to fight about. It's not like there's a farm bill. They're whipping the farm bill on the Hill, and they're pushing it, and they're pushing it, and they're pushing it, and that's their sole focus. And then the farm bill either passes or doesn't. So that infighting doesn't happen. But when you have some sort of new edict every day, or new agenda item, or you're sending out a social media post, or something happens that you react to in a way that creates that infighting, it's going to happen more frequently and earlier in an administration.
In addition to the now calls from both sides of the aisle for Hegseth to go, we saw today, I'm not sure, is it a congressman or a Senator Bacon? I know he's a Republican.
It's Don Bacon, is a Republican from Nebraska.
And he's calling for Hegseth to be taken out of office. He's like, this guy's got to go. We've seen Steve Bannon, not Bannon, but Bannon, and Elon Musk kind of infighting and going at it. And what Bannon writes is that in theory, a strong president could intervene, could resolve these differences, unite his or her own team, establish a clear vision for his or her administration to follow. In practice, however, Trump appears content to play the role of president bystander and just watch these divisions grow and get even worse.
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising. Now, Don Bacon just is he's a representative from the 2nd district, I believe, of Nebraska. He wins by a hair every single time. It's a purple district. It's safer for him as a Republican to say that he's opposed to Pete Hegseth. Like we were talking about with David Weigel, when you have more people saying these things, it has a bigger effect, right? So you have to convince a certain number of Republicans. He also doesn't facilitate other Republicans. It's not like there's a conservative Republican in the House who says, "Oh, well, Don Bacon said it. It's safe for me to come out and agree." Right? He's not that type of a representative because of where he's from and how close his races are. That said, it's better than nothing, and it means a Republican is saying it. And while a lot of Republicans in the Senate voted against Hegseth, or some did, maybe I shouldn't say a lot, I guess some did, that there has to be a dam that breaks in that direction. Even then, the White House is not just going to bend on this right away.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm looking at some other headlines. Just don't want to miss anything as the
Well,
show is ending.
Are they 48 seconds of sports headlines or not?
No, would you rather do sports or would you rather talk about
Well,
how
I mean,
Jamie Raskin?
nobody would rather do sports than me, and certainly no viewers and listeners want sports.
Let's do 48.
But Tony, there was a sports. I believe somebody said it was. I think. Let me go to it. Hold on.
Yeah, the Angel game yesterday was interesting.
Well, Luis, what's that? Was interesting.
So the Angel game yesterday. Woo.
Oh, the Angel game. Yeah. See, there you go. That's 4 seconds of sports. We just
Sorry, I took it away from you. Yeah. You get it back.
For 48 seconds of sports, do my LA Kings have enough to take down the not so healthy Oilers this year? The Stanley Cup playoffs began on Saturday, so we'll talk about that too. But my take on the LA Kings is that they will be upset by the Oilers, even though it's not really an upset. I don't think that. I think they're really good, and it's not the popular opinion to say that the Kings are going to lose to the Oilers. But I think the health of the Oilers is being underrated. I think they're probably healthier than most people think right now. And so every day of rest starting on Monday, important. Leon and Connor will be there, and I think it'll be tougher for the Kings than people think. But that said, it could be a great series, and in fact, the Kings could do really well, and they could come out of the West because it's sort of anybody's conference after you get rid of the Oilers in a way. I hope that helps, Luis. And now the Angels game. Tell me about the Angels game, Tony.
Oh, they were losing, and then ninth inning they got like 4 runs, and it's one of those ninth inning things. Like, hey, look at that!
Yeah, it's always fun. Always fun when that happens. And then because Mark's not here and he's a tennis fan, Carlos Alcaraz losing to Holger Rune at the Barcelona Open. He's a Spaniard losing in Spain. That's not supposed to happen, but it did happen, and that's 48 seconds of sports. We're done.
There you go.
All right. Thanks,
Beautiful.
guys. Thanks, Tony, for the Angels reference. We have hockey. We have tennis. Ken,
Wow.
what do we have tomorrow on the show? I'm not here until Friday, but what do we have on?
Well, tomorrow is David K. Johnston, the Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist and author. We'll be talking politics, so that'll be really, really good. And then we get you back on Friday.
Tell him how sad I was that I didn't get to talk to him, as I love talking.
I will tell you that, but you'll be back hosting the show on Friday, I believe.
I will indeed. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And I will see everybody Friday. I thank everyone for watching, for listening. Thank Coachella Valley Coffee. Thank David Weigel for coming in here. I admonish you to follow him and to subscribe to his email. It's really, really good. Tony, thanks for everything.
Here's a 24-hour moose cam that's going on in Sweden.
And everybody have a good rest of your Monday.
It's the moose migration. Thank you, Luis, for another super sticker.
It's devoid of moose.
Yeah,
There's
thank
one
you
right there
in the
crossing.
moment. I appreciate it. Look at that.
That doesn't look like. There's a moose. I see a moose. There's a moose.
Flashing through the rivers. Isn't that nice?
Wow.
What a great way to end the
pretty
show.
good.
Michael Shure,
It is.
thanks
It's
for
like
hosting.
the end of CBS News Sunday morning when they do that Nat sound and they say, "Oh, we're in."
The little thing going out, right?
There you
Exactly.
go.
Special operation.
The Mark Johnson Show.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody. Bye, Michael Shure. Bye, Tony.
Yeah, everyone.
After Party Live is next.
I'll drop a link.